So thanks for coming. The goal of the session that we're going to have today is just to talk about what the year is going to look like for the mentees, and talk about the expectations we have for everybody involved, for the mentor, for the mentees, for us, et cetera, et cetera. So again, first let me start by thanking you both for agreeing to be mentors. By and large, it's a great experience for everybody involved. Occasionally we've had some hiccups, but they're pretty rare. And hopefully you'll have a wonderful experience. And we're here to help facilitate the process for everybody. So just by way of background, since neither of you, I think, have been mentors in our program before, is that right? Ellen, I don't think you haven't. So we're in our 13th year now, and so over time, the program, of course, has evolved, as have our funding sources. Most of the students in the program right now are funded off the NIH TL1 grant, which is a NERSA T32 funded through the CTSI. And so a lot of the restrictions that we've already told the students about relate to the usual sorts of things about taking NIH money, what we can and can't spend money on, etc. So one thing I thought I'd start with is just to explain a little bit of the acronyms and sort of where we fit in the universe, since everybody is universally confused about this. So we are the Clinical and Translational Research Fellowship Program. So we are the year-out program for students who've been submitted an application, had it reviewed by a faculty committee, it was selected, and they're getting a stipend to take a year off. So that is an activity, but not the only activity related to the other thing that all the students are involved in, which is being in a pathway. So as you know, the students are required to be in a pathway because we are the CTR fellowship program, most of them, but not all of them are in the CTR pathway, but it's not a requirement. So we do have some students in health and society, and we have students in molecular medicine, etc. So what we explained to the students yesterday is that everybody in the fellowship program has to be in a pathway, but there are people in the pathway who are not in the fellowship program. So for instance, the CTR pathway has a light version, if you will, where students do basically a 3-month rotation, do a short research project, and their legacy product, which they're required to produce, is less involved, obviously, than a year-long student. Conversely, if a student is in our program, if everything goes well, they will produce enough to meet their legacy requirements for the more extensive pathway path, if you will. So the students essentially graduate with an MD with distinction, where the legacy product is usually at least one peer-reviewed publication, which they are first author. We used to actually require a thesis, old-fashioned style thesis, but now we're accepting publications. So the students understand that the work is going to finish officially at the end of next year, but probably some of that work will continue as they polish up stuff, and they just have to be done with their pathway requirements by, I think a few months before they graduate. So it's important for the students to understand the relationship between the pathway, the CTRP, and the MD with distinction committees, because as part of their pathway participation, they will also be assigned a committee. That used to be the MD with thesis committees. I don't know if you guys have ever participated in those. They have morphed. And what we're doing now is putting together a 3-person committee, where one of the 3, by definition, is the primary mentor, so that'd be you guys. The second person would be somebody who we're going to ask you to name, somebody who's outside your research group but familiar with the field. And then the third person is somebody who we will also assign for you. This will be one of the members of the faculty research evaluation committee that reviewed all the applications in the first place. Doesn't mean it was received, but they were told.
Can you explain about the second mentor that worked with you?
Yeah, so we want somebody who's familiar enough with the work that they can contribute to assessment of the student's progress going forward. The idea is that the student would meet with the committee a few times, 2 or 3 times at least in the course of the year, and extending into their 4th year as the time approaches for them to complete their legacy product. Again, it would be yourself, somebody who you think would be a good member of the committee, and somebody who will appoint as a 3rd member from the faculty. It's meant to be helpful for the student. Still a work in progress. The program is now run by Kathy Park.
Excuse me.
So again, we're still figuring our way out around this, but that's the intention anyway. As far as the year is concerned, our goal is to, what I told the students yesterday is, we expect them to be productive. They will write abstracts. Most of them will write papers. Again, if they don't write the paper, if they want to graduate with MD with distinction, they have to write a thesis, the old-fashioned type. But the productivity is very important. Clearly, that's not really our main outcome. The main outcome that we're looking for, and the thing that we're going to end up reporting to the NIH in the longer term, is how many of them are staying in some pursuit of scholarly activity. So the obvious, the holy grail is the R1 funded student, down the line, obviously. But the shorter term things that we're going to look for, or that the NIH is going to look for, is how many of them are staying in academia, doing a fellowship, getting Ks, things like that. So what I told the students was, the way I would put it to them, in a way that I think they'll understand, is I would rather they publish, a middling paper in a middling journal, and get excited about what they're doing and want to do more, and publish 5 papers in New England Journal, and just get so fed up with the process that they never want to do it again. So, having said that, one of the short-term outcomes that the NIH will look at is the publications, because that's something they can gauge as to whether we're doing anything useful with our students. So the goal of the program really is to engage the students, rekindle what we know is there when they come into 1st year, because they all say they're interested in research, and I believe them. I think there is curiosity there. We managed to drum some of it out of them in the course of their first few years. So my goal is to put together a program that will, now with some clinical perspective under their belt, help rekindle that sense of curiosity and motivation to be just like us, which is to contribute something to the world of medicine and academia. And of course, we'd love to be academics and get grants, but there are broader activities too that are perfectly fine as outcomes. Somebody becomes a prominent member of industry, that's fine. Or if they're contributing to policy, that's great. So we're pretty broad in our definition of success. So the students are primed to basically think about this as their sabbatical year. Take a step back, think about what they've learned, about what they think is important at this point, and really help them to think about where they might want to go in the future. To do this, we try to impose, if you will, some structure on the year, because I think that's important, but not too much. So we want them to spend most of their time with you guys and doing the science, but we also want to give them some structure and exposure to the things that some of the other people in the program are doing. So you should have a copy of the year at a glance, and there are basically not very many requirements for the students, but what we do require, we really do require. And that is that the students attend our works in progress, the WIPs. These are generally twice a month, maybe every other week, depending on the month. And the goal here is that we have a 3-hour block, in which we divided the students into 2 groups, where the first hour is the first group with 2 student presentations. The second hour, everybody is there for, and that's the faculty presentation. And then the third hour is the second group of students staying for their scientific presentations, and the first group of students. So right now, those are scheduled around lunchtime, and we provide lunch at noon. What we're probably going to do in the second half of the year is switch the time. In response to some of the feedback that we've had from some of the students this year and previous years, they preferred it if we didn't actually have it right in the middle of the day because it's a bit disruptive. So we'll probably move the whips to the beginning of the day, in the second half of the year. As soon as we've found the rooms, etc., we'll let you know what those are. We would like you very much to be there when your student is presenting. The student presents 3 times a year. The first presentation is really, this is what my application was and what we're planning to do. The second one is sort of a mid-year progress report type of thing. And the third one approaches the end of the year and talks about what they've accomplished and what they still need to do. The year is then capped by their oral presentation at the Student Research Symposium, which is another requirement. And it's also one of the requirements that we have for you guys. We, again, try to minimize our demands on you, but there are just a few things we really do need you to do. One is to show up for your students' whips, and the other is to participate in the Student Symposium. And that is one of the items that we're going to ask you to sign, where we have quite a few students in the program. This year, I think 26 students presented. So it took a big chunk of the day. We don't expect you to be there the whole day, but we would expect you to be there at least for half of the day. And one of the things that really presses my buttons is when a student is speaking and their research group is there, that's great, and then that student finishes, the next one gets up, and then a whole bunch of people stand up and leave, because their students finished talking. I think that's really rude myself. It's not setting the right example. So what we'd like you to do is to set aside the morning. You're also welcome to stay for lunch, but really be there for the first group of students, help to participate in the proceedings. The whips, the end of the year presentation, and then of course, the ongoing interactions you're going to have with your students, very important. Everybody's different, of course. How they organize that with their student depends on a lot of factors. But I will tell you that over the years I've learned that regular contact is very, very important. Being available to the student, when they need you, not being left alone. If you need to be gone, which of course we all need to be gone, to have somebody around who can be available to the student in case they need some assistance is also very important. We meet with the students 3 times a year, one-on-one, talking about how it's going for them. We also ask them to fill in e-values 3 times a year, where they'll be reporting on their experience, both with the program, us, with the mentors group, and with the science. And we will also ask you to fill in an evaluation 3 times a year also. This is through e-value. A lot of filling in the circles, not too demanding of your time, but very, very important for us. And NIH will look at that as far as how often people are responding to our requests for feedback. One thing I've told the students, just so you know, is that our role as program leaders is to facilitate the student's experience. So you know how when you're buying a house, if you've ever had the pleasure, you have the selling real estate agent and the buying real estate agent, and there's sometimes a conflict of interest on the part of the real estate agent. So what I've told the students is that we're essentially their real estate agent. We are there to be their advocates. The student sometimes is in a relatively powerless position when they're dealing with faculty or more senior members of the research group. And so if there are issues that come up, I've told the students that they should plan on having us be their representatives if the need arises. It doesn't arise very often, but it has arisen every now and then. Students have had some issues with personality conflicts with others in the group. These are inevitable. When you're 26 students, something is going to be not quite perfect. Sometimes they've not had sufficient attention from the mentor. So sometimes issues arise, and almost always it can be worked out. But I will say that over the last 13 years, probably on 3 occasions, we've ended up moving a student out of that particular research group to a different one for reasons that simply couldn't fix the issue. So the students are being conditioned to think of us as people on their side, if you will. And I think that's actually helped them a lot. In that regard, one of the other things I've told them, and I think this is just good academic advice in general, is to start thinking early about authorship of the papers that are going to come out of my research group. When we're about to start a project, I have the people who are involved write the title of the paper and the authorship order that they think is going to be, so that everybody's kind of on board at the beginning and there's no unpleasant surprises. So I've told the students that they should talk about that with you guys early on in the process too. The expectation is that since the students have written the application with you guys and they're doing their primary project with you guys, that the definition, or at least our definition of their participation in that primary project is such that it would qualify them to be the first author on the major publications coming out of that work. Which isn't to say they have to be the first author on every publication, but they do need to be recognized as first authors for their participation in that project, whatever it is they propose to do. We also tell them that, since in research there are down times, there are crazy times, to keep them busy and productive, to think about secondary projects, things that may be related to what they're doing in the primary project or potentially completely unrelated, as long as it has some pedagogical value. And for those, that might be doing an analysis of an existing data set or helping somebody with something that's already ongoing. And in our minds, that doesn't necessarily qualify for first author. That's maybe a middle author place, but it's again something that's worth discussing up front with the students. Just this year, I had a call from a student saying it was their understanding they were going to be the first author of the work that they did for the entire year, and then an assistant professor felt instead that that person needed the publication more for their career. That's not a good reason to be pushing the student away from that position. So we had some back and forth about that, and the student ended up keeping the appropriate first author position on the paper. So these things do happen, and the student said to me, "I wish I'd listened to you, talked about it earlier on." So it was a learning experience for the student, but again, I obviously prefer to avoid that. So for the secondary projects, it could be with your group or with your assent, because you're really responsible for them. You need to agree to everything. You might think it's fine for them to work with somebody else on something else, but you really need to be in the loop, whatever it is they're doing. So are there any questions so far about it?
Just a practical question. My first comment is that I think it's great that with these kind of standards, or like I said, we've already started doing a lot of this with particular but I think that maybe you guys already discussed it with them or not, because I already got some of this from the student. Like,
When did you talk to the student?
well, I think it was just like earlier this week. And he said, these are my expectations for this year, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of aggregating a lot of what you said.
Okay. So it's kind of listening.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of surprising for me to hear. I think that you're right. A lot of my questions just aren't aware of what the practical points of a lot of these things are. So, I think it's fantastic. Just as a practical question though, with the authorship issue, I think it is kind of tricky because, you know, oftentimes we don't know how projects evolve, how much effort they require from people, and they only have 1 year to do this, which in many cases is like too short to do something. So I like the idea of having these things set up front, but, you know, what's your advice on, you know, let's say you have some agreement up front, then it needs to change. For example, if, you know, someone else who's helping with that project actually does the majority of the work.
So, I mean, the students also will come to understand that things change. That's what I told them yesterday. We met with them for the second time yesterday. That one of the exciting things about the year is you know where you're starting, but you don't know where you're going to end up. That's, you know, that's a thing that I think gets all of our juices flowing in the morning. So things will change by definition. But I do think that in that case, it's very important to have that conversation in an ongoing way, so that everybody understands what the implications are of those changes, and everybody's comfortable with it. I think, you know, I'm not saying that the students should be given credit for something that they don't deserve credit for. I am saying that the level of participation in their primary project is such that by most usual standards, that would qualify them to be the first author of that work. Yeah, they know that things are going to evolve.
Do you give them a list of what it is they're supposed to do to be first author? Or do we do that? Because sometimes I think that's helpful, because then they can recognize when they have, you know, haven't met that standard.
We have not done that in the past, but one of the comments that we've had from this year's students, which I think speaks to that, is they wanted a session, you know, a faculty session early on in the year about writing papers. And I think, and in the past we've had from Rennie, you know, lots of prominent editors speak. But one of the things that we're going to try and set up this year is an early in the year faculty-led session talking about writing a paper and the authorship, you know, requirements that go with it, because they're public. So I think it wouldn't hurt for you to reinforce it, but we'll hopefully all be saying the same thing. It's really one of the trickiest things for all of us in academia.
Right, leadership is a standard.
Yeah, but just my own
And
experience.
I've never quite seen a great description.
Yeah.
For first authorship or authorship?
Well, first, just sort of like, you know, because there are all these considerations, that you're right, there's always this conflict with my idea. And I know it's really the bulk of the work, who drafts the manuscript, but when you get into whose idea, but who carried it out. So I think we all have this, it's like we know it when we see it. But I'm not sure I've actually seen it written.
I've seen some written ones, they're imperfect. And you know, one of the great outs about that, I think, is the senior authorship position.
Yes.
Right? Because frankly, you know, the student wrote the application with you guys, but it's your work primarily that led to it.
Right.
Right? So really, they're probably your ideas. And so, you know, the best outcome, for instance, is that the student's the first author and you're the senior author, and that's appropriate for your level.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in fact, that's how we worked out that conflict with that particular student. We just stuck with the assistant professor. Maybe it wasn't ideal for that level of the position, but they ended up in a senior position, so they had something they could point to. So we want to, obviously, we want to make everybody happy, but our primary responsibility is the students for this year. I'm delighted that the student came in talking about expectations. That's a great start to an open relationship with you all. Although we've articulated this as a student sabbatical, if you will, it is also our expectation that the students will work their butts off. It is not going to be a vacation. Yes, they have some time to go to a restaurant at night, all the sorts of things that they might not have been able to do when they're doing their rotations. But they really should be working hard. And it is a full-time job. They're not allowed to be working outside, and they're also not allowed to take anything for credit. definition, when you're on a nurse at T32, you're not allowed to get any credit towards your clinical degree. So they may be auditing courses, for instance, we allow them to do that, but they understand that it's to help them with their research, but they're not going to get academic credit for it. One of the other things I told them yesterday is that if they haven't already done that, they should talk to you about working on your CHR approvals and get those in the hopper as soon as possible, because those tend to be the biggest delays in a student's progress. You know, they only have 12 months, and it's kind of irritating if 4 months of that is taken up by the back and forth of CHR. So if at all possible, I would suggest that you meet with them and talk about getting the application in ASAP. It's up to you to decide how involved you want them to be. We find it to be a good learning experience for the student to do it with your help. But if at all possible, you know, that's one of the avoidable delays that students experience. The other avoidable delay that students experience, and I'm not sure if this applies to any of you, is on occasion we've had students in the past X number of years whose project required a product or a molecule from a company, you know, and then, you know, companies are on their own agenda, and you say, oh, well, you know, change our mind, or we're not going to make it available for another few months, that sort of thing. So if there's anything that is sort of not in your immediate control, it would be best to try and work those details out as soon as possible to avoid unnecessary delays. We told the students a couple of other things. We stressed the importance of HIPAA. I told them they're going to prison if they have protected health information on their laptop that's not encrypted, that's then stolen, and or in the hold for a few $100,000. I think that got their attention. And so please make sure that if your students are using a laptop, that it's encrypted. And of course, you know, we're trying to teach them good HIPAA hygiene in the first place, which is to minimize the amount of PHI on a computer. To that end, also I pointed out that they have access to my research. I don't know if you guys use it or not, but that's a good, safe way to store your PHI if you need to store it. So just telling you this so that you know what the students have heard. So we will be contacting you about the works in progress. We'll be contacting you to try and, we'll primarily try and work around your schedule and schedule the students' whips when you're available. We understand it's not always possible, but we'd like everybody to do their best to work it out so they're available. And if it turns out that you can't do it, if you could at least get somebody else from your group who could be there for the student and also participate in the discussion. It really, the students love having faculty there. It elevates the quality of the discussion, and I think everybody benefits. One of the other requirements for the students, besides participating in the WIPs, is to attend and all of the inter-school student-run journal clubs and to run one of them. So this is, we run these now for about 3 years. These are inter-school, so they're meant to be multidisciplinary, student-run with the help of faculty, but primarily student-driven. They pick the papers. They're meant to be clinical and translational research, and to be of broad interest to attract students from all 4 schools. And in fact, the group that runs any one journal club will retain students from all 4 schools. But since our students in the program are the ones who have the most time, because they have this year off, we've asked them to take the primary lead in running it, and each one needs to be running one of them. We're probably going